Welcome to another edition of Thought Leaders Live, where we talk with thought leaders in business, life, and all points in between. Today, very juicy topic. Uh, Tom Beckman is joining us. Tom is a strategic communications leader, consultant, educator, more than 30 years of experience helping organizations align messaging, culture, in business strategy. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here. I appreciate it so much. It's you have a great series of experts on, and I am very humbled to be considered part of it. So thank you, Greg.
Oh, yeah, you bet. So today we're going to talk about AI as the paradigm shift in strategic communications. And before we get into that, I mean, this is a big topic we're going to try and hammer through in the next half
Okay,
hour. But Tom, tell us a little bit about your personal journey and what you're doing business wise these days.
great. So my background, I have a degree from the University of Wisconsin in journalism, and I went to work for a number of increasingly larger agencies in the Milwaukee area. After doing that for a number of years, I caught on with a little company called GE and led a number of marketing and communications for a number of their businesses in healthcare, water, and electric vehicle space. So I was very lucky and very blessed to have some incredible teams, launch some incredible products, work on 20 plus acquisitions, work recognized, globally, some awards that were really kind of cool to have, and also travel the world. I
Wow.
was blessed at being able to, not just visit, but literally work in 20 plus countries. So it gave me an interesting perspective on the power of being able to create messages that focus on audiences and really being able to speak to them. For the last 13 years, I think I've been a consultant on my own. Left the glamorous life of the corporate world and decided I missed the creative element of our field. I feel like we're very lucky in strategic communications to wear a creative hat and mix it with strategy. So it's I think that I've rediscovered, when I first did this, I kind of rediscovered the joy of writing and creativity again, and I continue to work with companies in the water space, financial services and insurance, energy, healthcare, and really a variety of services. I've worked for multiple years, really focused on employee engagement. Right now, I'm focused on some media relations work and creative storytelling, and helping an organization tell positive stories in the news media around what's going on. And that kind of allowed me to pivot, which I think kind of brought us together, which is getting into education and feeling like I've was at a point in my life where I had some fun experience and it was time to share. And I hooked up with some wonderful people that Greg and I have in common. That it started out years ago of being a guest lecturer and coming in and talking about how you can build your personal brand and treating you like a brand. And I've been giving that lecture to students for probably like 10 years now, and it's a great way. Well, that kind of led to a conversation around maybe a potential opportunity in the curriculum to build a class focused around real world marketing campaigns and taking a look at how organizations create emotional stories to reach their consumers.
Wow.
So 4 years ago, I created a class called The Anatomy of Marketing Message Strategies, and we look at how you create these stories in real world applications, crisis, new product introductions, issue management, and really dive into how stories help an organization move forward in that. And again, build an arsenal of tools that we all use in our careers and sometimes take for granted. Well, that led to a great conversation last fall, maybe a little bit of being in the right place at the right time conversations going on in the School of Journalism around AI and what are we doing and how are we need to thinking about that, because research has shown that 90% of employers right now, when they are interviewing graduates out of looking in strategic communications, are asking about their experience of AI and
Sure.
what do they know. And so uh, I put together a course on looking at, how is AI applied in the strategic communications process. And that is a really hands-on, kind of, every week looking at that process. Everything from, a week ago we had a group assignment on looking at how you create audiences and personas using AI tools. And I generally, we talk about it. I give them prompts, and then we have groups of students look at two different tools and compare, because no two AI tools are exactly alike, and they give you very different responses. So a lot of the class is helping the students not only learn how to use AI, but recognize its imperfections and where it's good at. And that's
Wow.
kind of how we're spending the next couple months here. And it's a learning process for me. I continually talk to the students about where we're going, what we're discussing, and seeing the incredible work that they do. It opens up my eyes to the incredible you know potential and possibility of how this is used to make us as communicators better, smarter, faster.
So Tom is also teaching at the UW, University of Wisconsin, my alma mater as well,
Yep.
Wisconsin. Uh, let's talk a little bit about just the overall paradigm shift. I mean, you and I both come from a world where the writer was a big part of the communications, the strategy. The strategy would get set, the writer would go write the content, everybody to approve it. I mean, just simplifying some things here, but
Yeah.
tell me where you see things working differently now. What is the paradigm shift?
Um, that is kind of the core of what it really what AI is about and what it can do. So as I was thinking about this, Greg, and this conversation in the class, I kind of thought about strategic communications and kind of five challenges that we face in doing our jobs and how AI fits into that. So I think number one is we're trying to understand audiences at a deeper human level now. you know Audiences are very fragmented, they're skeptical, and consumers want emotional connections with a brand. All right. So as a communications professional, that kind of means not only do we really need to know who that audience is, but we really need to know what they think and feel now.
Mhm.
So it's evolved, from, I won't date either of us, but, from when we started, it was a little bit simpler, that we're expected to have that deeper knowledge, and we're also expected to know it a lot faster too. So what can AI help with? So as I think about this, it can help draft personas incredibly quick. We did, I mentioned this exercise, this assignment that we did on identifying target audiences for some companies and developing, a persona for one of those. We did that in about a week, and it wasn't a solid week. Versus previously in other coursework, the students were telling me they were taking 6 weeks to kind of reach to these personas. And I got to be honest, as I read through them, they blew me away, the level of detail that they can come up with,
Sure.
relatively quickly. So I think that it helps us understand who our audiences are better. All right. Number one. Number two, I think it helps balance the speed with strategic depth. Um, let's be honest as well. We are sometimes asked to move incredibly fast, right? Something goes on, and we need to communicate, get the word out, internal, external, maybe just a segment of an audience, but without doing it without sacrificing strategy. So sometimes, as we know, we act quickly. Sometimes, we kind of miss the mark a little bit, right? We're so focused on that. So I think where AI can help here is maybe it helps with the first draft of materials. Maybe it helps scenario planning. Maybe it helps you think about, balancing rational versus emotional messages that, otherwise you might not have had the ability to. I think the third, thing where it can help is, I mentioned, earlier about, consumers crave these emotional connections with brands. But sometimes as we create these messages, we sometimes go too far rationally and some too far emotionally. So I think that, when we think about how, AI can come into this, it's a little bit of a brainstorming tool if you think about it that way. That it can help, generate kind of emotional, rational messages, but give you variations incredibly quickly. It can, identify pain points. It can the language that you're using, and then what I love as well, and especially if you're moving quickly, it can stress test your tone, your credibility. How are these messages going to resonate with audiences before you even push anything out that we couldn't do before? I think number four, is, and I'm a big believer in as well, is, synchronizing messages across multiple channels. All right. Something I think a lot of us have always struggled with, especially as old school guys, of how do you know what you're saying on channel one is resonating and consistent in channel two, channel three, channel four. And I think that, if you, use that ability of AI to kind of translate cross channel, it opens up doors for you. So it gives you a little bit of speed. It allows you to identify inconsistencies and contradictions in messaging incredibly quickly. And then number five, which I think, we're getting asked more and more because of the tools that are available to track. But how about what's our strategic value and anticipating the impact? So, I think, one of the age old dilemmas that we've always been faced in the communications world is, what's the value? What are you delivering to the organization? And not just, pushing a news release out, but how are you moving the dial with that? And I think that, by using, some of these AI tools, we can help. We can start to look at how a message may resonate before we push it out. We can simulate audience reactions, maybe potential objections that we might get. We can, evaluate and comparing multiple messages. All right. If we adjust the tone of this message, is it going to change perceived reaction? And again, as we're trying to move quickly, I think it really reshapes how we solve and do what we do. It doesn't replace it, because all of those things I just talked about, there is still a human element and judgment that goes into using these tools. And that to me is kind of, the one of the core, things that I try and teach in the class, and anybody that I talked about AI doesn't replace the human brain. It doesn't write with empathy. It doesn't understand emotion. It doesn't understand how to create those, doesn't understand sarcasm either, by the way. So you need to understand how to balance that. And that's where I think when you start, thinking about that, it becomes an incredibly powerful tool and shifts how we work and think about, our little world of communications.
I like what you said about judgment, and I when I'm using AI and I'm producing the things you're talking about, you had a good point before we jumped on the call about just the sheer volume of material it will kick back to you and so quickly. And I feel like our job is like to sift through a lot of that and really find the nuggets, because I think we make some of those connections that maybe it doesn't. I mean, we that's the one thing I've learned about AI is, it's an autofill. It doesn't have the human capability to make some of those connections that it wouldn't necessarily, might not have all the context that you have in your mind.
Yep.
And that's where I think that judgment comes in when you're teaching people to use the tool, and you're getting, I mean, you just gave us a laundry list of stuff there that was quite in depth. And I can see the AI output coming back to me with what you're describing. When you're working with students, I mean, how do you help them kind of make those judgment calls and winnow down all that information?
I think I'll pick an assignment that we did recently because I think as you and I were talking before as well. Let's be honest. We could teach a 10-year-old to write a news release using ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Not that hard, right?
Well,
If you are looking to check the box to get a news release out, you could do that. Now, the part that's missing is that person does not understand tone. They do not understand message. They do not understand empathy, maybe any corporate mission. So, do you check a box by putting that out? Yes. Is it effective? I would argue no. And that's the human element. And one of the things that I try and work through with the students, and we really spend a lot of time on, is the prompts and the executive thinking that goes into it. You know, um, you know, eh, I've been doing this for a while. Much like you, and it still takes me to write a news release using something like a Gemini or Chat GPT. Yes, it goes faster. But you know what? I'm still working 10, 12, prompts, 15 prompts, playing with headlines, playing with, the wording of a quote, finding the right proof points, things like that, that to me is there's an experience component that goes with using AI. So one of the things that I try and we talk about in the class with the students is your first prompt isn't ever going to be enough. So when we have an assignment where I create a fictional company and a fictional product, and I ask them to write a news release using two different AI tools using the same prompts, I want them to experience the pros and cons of different tools. Because no two AI tools are alike. And I think, if you talk to this class, they would tell you, and they're learning very quickly, different tools are better at different things. They're smart and they learn the more you use them. In some ways, in a scary way, they get smarter and better. So it's very much in the prompts of where you're going and challenging the tools as well. So this week we're working. We had in the previous week we had developed audiences and personas. All right. The following week we then took that persona and we're focused on uncovering what are the dilemmas and the solutions that are preventing this customer, this consumer, from buying our product. We're now in the stage of understanding again what hurdles that customer is facing in creating rational emotional messages. And one of the things that I challenge the students is, and that I'm looking for when they come back next week with this assignment, is how did you challenge those messages? How did you ask these machines how they will resonate with your target audience? And what objections may come? And that's where I think the tool has value, that we can write a headline and we can pump it into the tool and say, what do you think? Is this going to attract attention? If it's posted on LinkedIn or if this appears, in a newsroom, is somebody going to pay attention to this? Or can I say it better?
Yeah, I absolutely. I think that, that this quantity of information we're getting, there's the old saying, I forget who said it, maybe Churchill. Sorry, this letter was so long, I didn't have time to make it shorter.
Yeah.
I think that is the role of the writer, is to condense, omit needless words, as Strunk and White always said, and
Yeah.
to get that messaging tight. And Tom, my concern is with all this glut of information, one, we're going to become worse writers. I think that's easily happening because we are just relying on ChatGPT to write everything. And two, we're going to become worse readers because that's an incredible amount of reading. And when you are looking at AI output, you have to get into each word. It's so easy to see something and go, that looks good, but then read it and
Yeah.
like get into the details and really parse that out and take a look at that and like, is that really what I want to say? Do you think this is a skill that people are losing, or is this what you're trying to teach in the classroom?
I think it's an interesting question. So I need to frame this a little bit. I think that you do run the risk if you don't understand what it is kicking back and taking it at face value and not challenging it. You do run the risk of just blindly accepting what it gives to you. And let's admit it, when it tells you something, it tells you it confidently.
Oh, yeah.
It is not telling you, well, I think it might be X. No, it is telling you X is the solution. And if you don't learn to say and push back to say, I need you to find me, where did you find this data?
Right.
Because there have been times that, in my own world where I've written something and then it comes back and I say, I need you to tell me the source where you got this. And it comes back and say, well, it's an amalgamation of a number of articles. I'm like, that
Yeah,
doesn't work.
that
I need
doesn't
you
work.
to find actual data that validates this, and so
Yeah.
you can start over. And I think that is the fear of blindly, like you mentioned, like reading. How do you read all this and blindly accepting what is given to you? I think is again the human judgment and element of it, that is where I see kind of the our jobs are, and how we think about them changing again, because we're overburdened. And let's be honest, even the information you're pushing out to consumers, just look in your own world. We're bombarded with messages that we can't keep up with. There's a
Yeah.
great post on LinkedIn that I shared earlier in the week. Was picture of a dog side by side. The one side said, I chased a squirrel today. The other side was a big lengthy AI generated text about the dog's perception and how he was chasing a squirrel and what he was going to do with it. And I'm like, all right, I love AI and what it can do, but sometimes the short, brief message is all it takes.
I agree. And that whole thing about the conversations and the prompts, to what I've said is it to create quality content, it's not going to create faster. It can create faster content, but our goal is to create fast quality content. And I think you got to kind of get the balance right on what it takes to do that. And I almost feel like, to your point, I've spent so much time trying to get that initial draft right, trying to get it to correct, redo these things. And I've talked to other writers and they're like, look, I should have just written the damn thing myself. And I almost feel like your first your first draft, you should write the first draft and that should be your prompt. Like, now take this and make it better.
Yep.
So I don't know. I'm on the soapbox here, but it seems like that has been the most efficient way for me to work it.
And that's actually a great way for somebody who isn't sure how to use AI, like, of how do you dive into it and use it, because it can be somewhat intimidating. And, one of the things that I've seen and, encourage people is if write your own news release and then pump it into, a tool to ask those questions of, give me three options of headlines. And
Yeah.
the beauty is you'll have three options in 5 seconds that you can look through and go, yeah, that doesn't have quite the emotional tone I like, or what, I kind of like where you're going with this one, but it's not quite there.
Yeah.
And so I use it a lot like that. And it's great as well, when writing quotes for somebody, and you write it in your own words. You say, all right, I need you to punch some holes. Can you make this more conversational? Or
Yeah.
I, I I don't really like the main message that I've got. I'm kind of not hitting it as hard as I'd like. And again, it'll give you three options, four, and you hone in. And to me, that's a little bit of the art of writing then, which is, taking your first draft and saying, how do I make this better?
So where do you see the traditional marketing department, or I'm sorry, it's traditional strategic communications, and this is kind of a big question, but where do you see the traditional roles changing? I mean, what is a communicator going to look like today? I mean, you used to have strategists and the creative and then the traffic person.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you see the roles looking like moving forward?
I mean, I think that, in a way, there will be more of a premium on strategy and thinking and human judgment in any role. What you mentioned. I've got a consumer company coming in to talk to the class, and later in March, that is going to talk about the creative element and how they use AI. And traditionally, they're in retail clothing, where they would do a photo shoot for a new shirt, and it would take almost a week, of different sizes, different colors, different models, and and inviting and talking to them and preparing for the class. My colleague was able to talk about now using AI and some of the tools that's available. That week-long photo shoot is now done in an afternoon, and they're using digital tools, in a matter of hours to give everything, the sizing, the color, that they spent a week doing. So there's a huge cost savings to that. So I think that, there is an innovative kind of thing. My fear as well is that, the arts, and, whether it's writing, it's producing music, movies, whatever, is it becomes too much of a commodity, with like I mentioned, we've talked about, you can teach a 10-year-old to write you a news release. Well, what's the value on that? So I think, finding organizations that truly appreciate storytelling, that appreciate the quality and the importance of telling good messages, hopefully will never go away, because that is how you stand out in the market. So I think that, we're in a little bit of a, the crest of a tidal wave now, where we're sorting through, like, I don't think we would have had this conversation a year ago,
Yeah.
you know, and we talk about that in the class a lot. Like, what, we wouldn't have been here a year ago. And then next year when I teach this, it's going to look even different, because, they're going to be different products. We're going to learn a lot more, about how to use it, how not to use it, the ethics and transparency of how to use these, tools and programs and what we communicate, and that's something we haven't really talked about. But, what's the ethics and transparency of using these in an organization, and the impact on your brand or consumer of, will your consumer feel differently if they find out after the fact that maybe the story they read or the video they watched was AI generated? Do they feel differently about that if they know in advance that it was created with the assistance of AI? And I think that's something a lot of organizations are still finding our way through, and how does it, hurt or help your brand?
I feel like there's immediate pushback when people sniff out, they see an AI comment on LinkedIn, or they'll read something and they're like, yeah, I see AI here, beyond the M dashes. You can just tell a lot of times that the structure is a certain way. But I also, we started out our conversation today, Tom, just talking about the beauty of being creators.
Yeah.
And, there's certain people I think are just kind of born to do it. I almost feel like, and I just want to get your reaction to this, that moving forward, we're still going to be hiring writers. Like, are you a writer first and then can you use AI tools? Like, I would rather hire a writer who knows how to use an AI tool than someone who is just uh, good at AI, because I think you
Mhm.
need that, like you're talking about, you need that inherent judgment. And same thing with a strategist. You have to be a strategist who knows how to use AI. I don't think you like flip the AI, just have somebody who's like, I'm good at AI. I can do everything that guy did now because I know AI. I don't know.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that?
I do have very strong thoughts on that, and I agree with you, because, when you think about it, um, there is no replacement for writing, right? And being able to create and tell a story, and, and without that, though, you run the risk of blindly accepting what these tools create for you. But if you know the mechanics of what goes into writing a good story, that will stay with you all of your life. That you know um, when you ask AI to proofread something or to give it a different tone or maybe change some of the syntax, when it's not working well.
You
But
feel it.
if you don't have that training, you don't know any better.
Yeah.
And that is one of the fears, I think, is, I like you, I put a premium on people that know how to create and tell stories and what goes into that. So a tool, like some of these tools then can make you smarter, faster, better. But without that background, you run the risk of truly commoditizing an art.
Well, Tom, this has been a great conversation. My fear is, 3 years ago, these 3 or 4 years ago, these AI tools couldn't even write a paragraph. So all this stuff might be a moot point.
Yeah,
And like Elon Musk said, eventually we're all going to be pets to AI. Hope
I
this
hope not.
I hope not to.
Yeah.
But anyway, not to leave us on a downer note, I do think, like to your point, and we were talking about this before the show. I feel like I've written some of the best stuff, like for clients that I've ever done with the use of AI. So I think it could, looking on the positive side, I
Yep.
think it could make us all dramatically better if we harness the human with the AI.
Yep. And it's got to, I think you're right that you need to treat it like a partnership. It's not a replacement. And that is, I think, when you really can, run afoul of, as you mentioned, becoming a pet.
Yeah. So Tom, if somebody, one, wants to take your class, or two, wants to work with you because they like your approach and they like
Yeah.
what you do with AI, how do they get a hold of you?
Let's see. So taking the class, definitely enrolled in the University of Wisconsin. Would love to see you there.
No problem.
Um, in addition to reaching out to me, I'm on LinkedIn. I think you've seen, Greg, that I'm very active and, posting what we go through, in this class and my other class. So find me on LinkedIn, and my email. Do you want me to give it?
If you want to give it,
Yeah, I'm cool. If you have questions about what I said, either you agree or disagree, or just want to pick my brain a little bit, it is Tom28Power, Tom28Power at gmail.com. And I'd love to hear from you.
you got to tell me what that 28 power means.
All right, so that came as I was starting up my business. I was at the time reading the biography of Vince Lombardi. And if you recall the Packers glory years, their big play was 28 power sweep. So I thought, I kind of like the name 28 power. So I tucked that away for when I became a consultant. I didn't want to just use my name. So I'm
Yeah.
like 28 power communications.
Who is 28? Is
Uh,
there,
it
is
was
just
just the play. It was the football play.
okay, it wasn't a particular player. Wow,
It
cool.
was
Was
the
that
two back runs, to the 8 hole, 28.
oh, okay. Was that the Moranis biography?
It was
Yeah.
one of the greatest sports biographies ever.
I've got to check it out. It's on my list.
Yeah.
Tom, thanks so much for joining us. Hold on for just a second after we end the stream. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Another edition of Thought Leaders Live. We'll catch you on the next one.